In order to describe where I am right now, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of background. So you'll just have to suffer that with me, so it will make sense. Otherwise, you think she must have been crazy to do what she did in 2002, and I wasn't. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about my upbringing. I was born into a Smith family, and I knew very young that we were descendants of Hiram Smith, who was a brother to the prophet. And whenever we would go out or about, Daddy would just say to us, "Remember who you are." And it wasn't an arrogant thing at all. It was a reminder, behave yourself. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass your family. And so we all grew up with that. Remember who you are. As we grew up in the church, and we knew about Hiram and Joseph. And we knew a little bit about what happened back then. We read the Book of Mormon when we were, kids. I never ever heard my father say anything negative about Emma. And I would hear things said about Emma in church all the time. Well, she wasn't righteous enough. She didn't follow the prophet. She didn't come west. Really negative things about Emma. And that irritated me, because I thought, I knew enough about what that woman had gone through, how many children she'd had and how many she had lost. And when she was pregnant, when the prophet was killed. And so she didn't come west, but none of Joseph's family did. So I grew up knowing about that, and knowing there was this horrible division with that family. And I knew that Joseph and Hiram were very, very close. And so I grew up knowing about that and being sorry about that. And resentful that Emma would be treated badly by members of the church. Anyway, so that was in my upbringing. I was aware of all of that stuff. We moved to Hawaii, and so I was in high school in Hawaii. And we were a long way from Utah at that point. And with 20/20 hindsight, that was one of the best things that ever happened to us, to get away from Utah. And we didn't live in a Mormon town anymore. The only other Mormon in the high school was my sister. And it was good. It was good for us to have that experience. Then I went back to the University of Utah after high school, and then I ended up living in California for 21 years. And by the end of that 21 years, I realized I was really a California Mormon and not a Utah Mormon. It's been a long time since I've been. And when coming back in the 70s, in the early 70s, I learned that there was a new edition of the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. And I really wanted to get that and read it. But I remember growing up that we were warned to do not read that book, because the church was concerned that there would have been changes made, that the reorganized would have made changes in it, and that we couldn't be sure that that was Joseph's doing. And I remember President McKay was very adamant, do not read this book. Do not read that book. So anyway, when I finally got a copy of it, just in '74 with a new edition, I felt like I almost had to put it in a brown paper bag when I took it to church, and to use it when I was teaching gospel doctrine in the 70s in California, because I knew that we weren't supposed to read that book, okay? And I had a friend that went with me to see a tanner, or a tailor rather, a church person, who knew a lot about early things in our history. And I was mesmerized. We would go up and visit with him for an hour, a couple of hours, and I would come away so enthusiastic with what I was learning about the early church, and how much I realized that we're not getting that in Sunday school lessons, and et cetera, et cetera. And my friends and I talked to each other a lot about it, but never to anybody else, because I swore that I would never do anything to somebody that couldn't handle early church history and would find their testimony wavering if they knew about it, that I would never discuss it with anybody that I felt I could harm in that way. But I was very comfortable in learning everything I possibly could about it. Anyway, so when I got the book, this is the Joseph Smith translation, and it's worn. It's really worn now. But in those early 70s, I decided I wanted to know exactly what Joseph had changed in the Bible. And my sister had given me a new scriptures, a Bible and a Book of Mormon, with a new edition the church had done. So I took my James, what is it? Help me. King James version of the Bible, and this one. And I started, I didn't have to get to work until 9 in then, not 8. So I'd go to the office about 6 in the morning, and with these two books, I started going through verse by verse together. And I'd read one and then read the other. And every single time there was a change, I marked that in this book. And by the time I got through Genesis, I was amazed, particularly in the first few chapters of Genesis, all of the changes that had been made and the additions that had been made. And this very quickly became my Bible, because Joseph put things in there that were just magnificent, additions and changes. And if you take away or add a not in a sentence, that totally changed what the sentence said. And this would happen over and over as I went through this. And it took me months to do this, because verse by verse by verse by verse. Then when I got to the New Testament, and Isaiah blew me away, particularly Isaiah 29, because there were whole columns of new material in 29, Isaiah. And it changed everything. And I had grown up knowing that there was a sealed portion. I knew that there was more to the Book of Mormon. But reading those verses in Isaiah, it blew me away. Where is this? Why don't we have this yet? Why aren't we ready? We'll get it when we're ready for it. And if we're not ready for it, why aren't we not ready for it? So I had a lot of questions back in the 70s, okay? And then when I got to the New Testament, particularly in Matthew 19, 20, and 21 up to 23, a lot of verses were added to that. It changed what the scriptures were saying. And I thought, how can anybody not use this book? Why don't they use the Joseph Smith translation? And it was years after my experience doing this, when I came to BYU in 79, and somewhere along the way, Brother Matthews, who was head of the religion department at BYU, had really worked very, very hard at getting to know the people in the reorganized church. And he got very good friends with them, and they trusted him. And when he asked if he could see the original Joseph's translation, the comments that Joseph had made about the Bible, that they would let him into the vaults so that he could see all of it. This ultimately happened. And he went over the whole everything that Joseph had changed and written and added, etc. And then with the current thing that the Reorganites had, they had not made any changes in it. They had not destroyed what Joseph had done in any way, shape, or form. And so it was then that the church finally said, it's okay to read this. So that was a long time after the 70s there. But I've always used this, every time I've taught the gospel doctrine with California and in here, Utah, this is the book I used for that because it was so much more complete than the other one. So with what I had learned in California before I ever came up here, and then coming to BYU, it was a volatile time. You're too young to remember these days. But the 70s, that was the decade of the women. We had gone through the decade of the civil rights in the 60s, and that had been, in California, it was violent. It was ugly in a lot of ways. And I wouldn't go down to my office on a weekend during the 70s because of the riots that would appear in Palo Alto. And I was afraid to go down there. And I went to a meeting at the Palo Alto City Council meeting. One of my former state presidents was also the mayor. And what I heard there and saw there and the anger that was expressed there, I thought if I was financially set up, I would have packed up and left California and never come back. But I couldn't do that, so I stayed. I was there for 21 years and got through the 60s. And my boss said that when we got into the 70s, he said, this is the decade of the women. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, women's rights, they want to be equal with the men. And I looked at my boss and said, why in the world would I want to be equal with a man when I'm in a superior position to begin with? And he just looked at me, oh, Ida, he just shook his head. But when I started looking back on my situation as growing up as a woman in the church and in the country, and my ox had never been gored, never. I had never felt inferior in any way, shape, or form to a man. My parents were as equal a pair as you could find on the planet. Daddy thought she walked on water, and I had never in any way, shape, or form felt that I was less because I was female. Certainly not in my family and not in the church. I didn't have that. I didn't have that experience. I'll never forget my sophomore year in college. I got a letter from my father, and he said, if you could grow up to be even a tenth the woman that your mother is, you will be worthy to have the place on this planet. I just thought all men felt that way about women. And since I've never been married, I've never had a man telling me what to do and when to do it. And there I was at BYU to be the head of the Women's Research Institute. And my whole story about getting there was an interesting process. But I won't go into all of that right now. But when I got up there, I realized I had walked into a cauldron. It was volatile. And if you're old enough, those of you who are old enough to remember the 70s, and it was the women's decade, and women were angry, and women in the church were angry. And so when I walked into that situation at BYU, I thought, okay, because on one hand, there were those who felt, since I come from California, I was this horrible liberal person. I thought I was very conservative until I got to Utah and realized, anyway, it was a whole new situation for me, and I thought, what am I supposed to do with the Institute? Because I had not gone after that job. In fact, I will tell you one thing. Back in those days, if you lived outside of Utah, you could get church news, just the church news without having to get the paper. And I would read the church news. And one day in the spring of '78, there was an article about the Women's Research Institute at BYU. And audibly in my head, I heard the words, "That's your job." It was so jolting to me, I almost answered it out loud. And I said, "That's crazy. There's no way I'd have that job." So I finished reading the paper, went back and read the article again. And again, in my head, as loud as it could be, "That's your job." And again, I said, "I don't have a PhD. That's not my job." But instead of throwing it away, I just tossed it in the bottom of my drawer and didn't think any more about it. Then in the end of May, I was at my desk where I was working for some landscape architects at that point, and the phone rang, and it was the operator asking for Ida Smith. BYU was calling. The president of BYU was calling me. And in an instant, I knew what it was about, I knew what they were going to ask me, and I knew what I had to do. And I didn't. Long story short, I came. And they had brought me up to it so I could interview several people in June. And I met with the Relief Society president and someone in the BYU. Dallin Oaks, who was the one who had told her somebody to get hold of me, was out of town. He said, "I don't need to interview her again. She doesn't, I don't need to talk to her again." So I talked to one of his vice presidents. When I spoke with the Relief Society president, she said, what would you do with the Institute? And I said, "I have no clue. I don't know. I didn't come after this job. They came after me." That turned out to be an interesting interview too, which we won't go into either. But anyway, so when I sat in my office the first day, it was about maybe 8 by 10. There was a desk and a chair in it. You couldn't get anything else in the room. That was my office. And I sat there and I thought, what the hell am I into? I had no clue what I was going to do. I had an enabling document, 3 pages long, and on the first page it had 3 or 4 things that they wanted me to accomplish. And I read through those things and I thought, okay. One of them said be a, not vision's not the word, somehow help people to know that the church cared about women. And I thought, okay, that I probably could do a little bit. I wasn't allowed to do empirical research, and it was a Women's Research Institute. So you can imagine for 5 years when people ask me, what am I searching, what am I, I have to say, well, we actually, how can I say I can't do research? I'm not allowed to do research. Anyways, it was an interesting 5 years. And I ended up doing a lot of traveling and speaking all over the country, literally from Hawaii to Washington, D.C., and from the Northeast to Texas. And in that 5 years, I think I spoke in Utah maybe 3 times. The women's conferences, they had me speak. But stake presidents in Utah did not invite me into their to speak to their women. But I digress. We need to go back now to I was at BYU until '98. I was there 21 years, 20 years. And all of this time, I had prayed, please don't call me on a mission. Because I knew that the church was trying. Sometimes it was very trying. But I knew that I could not go out and say, I know the church is true, the gospel's true, but the church is trying. And I felt I was being preserved mightily during that period of time. And when I left BYU, I was pleased, Bishop, do not make me the Relief Society president. Every time we had a new one coming up, I just, please, don't, please, please. And my sister and I, when we would sit in church on the first Sunday, would often, when the little kids, 5-year-old with 10, 6 years old, I know the church is true. I would just, it was like scratching on one of those boards, blackboard, yeah. And I thought, no, the church, the gospel's true. The church is trying. And I kept wondering all of these years, where's the sealed portion? Why aren't we getting it? Why aren't we getting it? Why aren't we getting it? Then my father died, and my mother died, and we still didn't have it. And nobody was talking about it anymore. And then Cleon Skousen had become a really good friend of mine. I met him in California. And when he moved back to Utah, I'd go visit him often. And we'd have wonderful, wonderful visits. He had written a lot of books on the Old Testament. And he was just a fun person to be around. And when I was up there one day, he was telling me that he had, with a friend of his, had taped the entire Book of Mormon, and with Noble, had read the verse, and then Cleon talked about it. And so I got those tapes, and I started listening to them. And this was years ago. And there were 36 tapes. And I would do it when I was preparing food and whatnot, and so I just over and over and over, when I got through with it, I'd start over again. And Cleon, every time we get to certain parts of the Book of Mormon, he'd talk about the sealed portion again. We need to prepare for it. We need to have it. We need to be ready for it, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this time, and every year I was more irritated that we weren't getting it. So in '05, when President Hinckley said he wanted everybody in the church to read the Book of Mormon by Joseph's birthday, and I thought that was a cool thing to do. And I was halfway through the tapes, and so I thought, I'm just going to start over again right now. And this time I read as he was talking about it. And it was an incredible experience doing it that way. And I got it done by the end of the year. And I thought, if everybody's doing this, if everybody's willing to do this, maybe we'll get it. Finally, maybe we'll get it. So when it came around the next year, '07, I just was glued to my television. Not a word. Not a word. Not a word about it. And I thought, well, it may take a while to get it translated, and maybe October. October came and went, nothing. And I was really bitterly disappointed, almost angry that we didn't have it yet. because by this time I wanted it for a very long time. So then in '07, my sister wanted me to go to something in Salt Lake because a woman was going to be talking about oh, help me with the name, Magdalene, Mary Magdalene. And it turned out to be the people who were, it was a video we were going to be watching. The women themselves were in there. It was a video. But I was glad I went, and it was interesting. And it was after that, if anybody's read my story, I found out the Book of Mormon, or the sealed portion had been. And I felt like I had been shot with something. Like stunned, like a stun gun was my reaction to it. And they sold this on the internet. I said, I don't want it on the internet. I just got to have it in my hand. And so within 2 days, I had it. My friend had it sent to me, even before I'd sent the check for it. And so I had the sealed portion in my hands, finally, and I felt envious of every minute that I had to stay away from it. I didn't want it. I didn't want it to be interrupted. I didn't want anybody calling me. And I started reading the sealed portion. And I want to talk about a little bit about some of these books, but that was the first one. I knew anything about it. Didn't know anything about the person who'd done it, but I had the book in my hands. And it was twice as big as the first third. Surprise, surprise. And it was a wrenching experience. It was the hardest. I used up boxes of Kleenex. I cried myself through the whole dang book. Every page, there were major, what's the word? Help me. Revelations on every page, just over and over and over. And I would think, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. But I started with the, back in that day, the book that I had, the newest version of the vision of Joseph's thing. I read that. It was only about 4 pages long. And I knew by the end of reading that, my days in the church were ending. By the time I read the book of Lehi, I was physically, morally, spiritually gone out of the church. It was gone. It was not a difficult thing for me at all, because I was finally getting the truth. And I know the church didn't have it, and there was no point in staying there. And then in June of that year, '07, I was at a family reunion, and I was playing with little kids on a hardwood floor, which is probably the coolest thing I was doing when I was 75. But anyway, I broke my leg and ended up in the hospital. And looking back on that, that was a gift. My broken leg was a gift, because I was in rehab for a month, and then I had every good excuse not to be in church. And so it was just an easy thing for me. And it wasn't for a year and a half later when the church decided they had to get rid of me, and so they called my excommunication. And I went, and by then I had met some other people who had read the Book of Mormon, and several of those dear people came to my excommunication. Nobody could go in with me. My nephew came, and Christopher came, and when they let somebody else in, Christopher and my nephew went in. But it was interesting. It'd be interesting to hear what went on in that room then. But by the time it was all over, I was pretty sure that, and the stake president came to that, and the bishop, well, his stake president says, is it okay if I'm here? Because he knows perfectly well they're not supposed to be at female excommunications. And I said, no, it's fine, you can stay. But I had occasion to talk to him several times within that last year, because I was helping a friend of mine who was going through divorce, and I'd gone with her to see the stake president. And I'm not terribly shy. I mean, I'm not afraid of authority. I never have been. I mean, I just am not. And when I left that room, I thought, he probably will tell the bishop, leave her alone. Don't bother her. I would love to hear exactly what he had to say. But it seems like every time their conference comes on, there's somebody who gives a talk in conference how much they want people who have been excommunicated back. You know, come back, come back, come back. We want you to come back. And I never really believed that. And I had been told some years ago that the percentage of people who come back into the church if they've been excommunicated is less than 3%. That's not a very high percentage. And so nobody called me. I will tell you this one thing, the Sunday after my excommunication, 10 minutes after church got out, someone was banging on my door. And I opened the door and she said, what happened? I said, I don't know. What? She said, the bishop came into the Relief Society room and said, Ida Smith has been excommunicated and you don't talk to each other about it, and left. I said, was that all? It didn't tell me why or anything. No, that was all. And I thought, okay, well, if they went into Relief Society, they probably went into the present priesthood meeting too. And so I thought, okay. So I think they got I don't know if he said anything more than that specifically, but only 2 people other than this woman had me right after the church that day contacted me at all to see what's happened. What happened? Are you pregnant? Are you what? What did you do? Nobody ever asked me that. And along the way, of course, by then, this had been 1.5 years, I had finally met Christopher. I read several of the other books beyond that. And I had been told 100 times, your job is not to preach. You don't proselyte, you don't preach. If anybody asks you a question and you can answer it, go ahead. But, other than that, basically keep your mouth shut. So here I was. I got one very sweet letter from a woman who said, you were always my favorite gospel doctrine teacher, and I miss you so badly. And it was very sweet. But nobody came to talk to me or ask me anything. And I thought, okay, so much for trying to get the black sheeps home again. And then when we finally got a new bishop, and I knew that man who was the new bishop, he's one of the good guys, and his wife is just wonderful. And I thought, I'll be interested if I get a visit from him. But I thought, no, they would have been warned, leave Ida alone. Don't contact her, leave her alone. That's the only thing that made sense to me. I don't know. Well, then it was, and I know you want some of this, and so I might just as well deal with it now. In August of 2008, a friend of mine, a dear friend that I have known since California days, we've known each other now for 60 years. Well, nearly 60 years. Anyway, she and her husband had been in Israel for a 18-month mission. And she was coming home, and I wanted to get the group together and visit. Ever since I retired, we would try to get together at least once a year, a couple of times a year, people from BYU and whatnot, that we'd work together and all of these things. And so I invited everybody, and I couldn't get anybody on the phone to respond to a date, and which I should have been smart enough to figure out by then. But anyway, so I called again, left another message, and then I got a letter in the mail from 7 of them, who said that because of some decisions I had made, it would not be possible. Well, he'll put the letter up there so you can read it. And I realized, okay, I had wanted to talk to those women because I had worked. I've known them for 30 years, worked closely with them for 20 years, and when all of this happened to me, it was with one particular that we'd been very close at BYU, and I had called and left a couple of messages for her, just saying, I really need to visit, whenever we can do that. Several times in '07, and she had never called me and never set up things to do that. And then by the time of August of '08, we still hadn't gotten together. And I figured by then she must know about it, but not by me. So when I got this letter, cold in the mail, that they couldn't, that if I was able to make changes or whatever, that maybe, but right now they could not associate with me. And so I thought, okay. I wasn't angry. I really was not angry. I was really disappointed. I mean, I was disappointed that after all that we had gone through together in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s at BYU and all of these things, that they would have picked up, one of them would have picked up the phone and said, Ida, what the hell are you doing? What have you done? What were you thinking? And they didn't. So after no conversation with them about any of this, the letter saying they can't associate with me anymore. And I was disappointed that they couldn't do that. I was not angry with them. I felt great pity for them at that point, because I thought, I had come to the point by that time in doing what I did and leaving the church and everything else, that because all my life I have not wanted, I wanted to be able to face the Savior. I wanted to be able to face Joseph and my great-great-grandfather, Hiram. I wanted them to be happy with me. I didn't want to disappoint those 3 people, and I really felt strongly about that. And so then I thought of what they're going to have to face when they have to face the Savior, and when they have to face Joseph. And when, by the time they get their memories back and that happens with them, they'll remember, you know that Ida Smith that we used to work with, and all these things we did, and the hundreds of times we went to the temple together with, she knew this all of the time, and we never asked her about it. And I think I do not want to be in their shoes when they have to do this. I really don't. And over the last 6 years, I've thought, I don't want to do anything that I'm going to be embarrassed to have to face with people that care most to me. And so I thought, okay, if that's the way they are, I'm not going to impose upon them or make it necessary that they talk to me or be with me and be uncomfortable. I didn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. If somebody doesn't want to be with me, that's fine. I just don't want to be. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. So I wasn't angry, I was just sad and disappointed. But then with my own family, they won't read it either. And you can lead a horse to water, but you can't take him to drink, and you can lead a horse to real truth, but you can't make him read. And it's not my job. I can't make it, I shouldn't want to make anybody do anything they don't want to do. And so I've been content, And I know Christopher sometimes, I think it bothers him that these things happen, but I'm not fragile, and I'm okay. And feeling shunned is okay. I mean, if people don't want the truth and they don't want to hear about it, and they don't want to be around me, then that's fine. I have these wonderful friends, right here, and I'm content as far as that's concerned. So let me talk for just a bit about these other books and how I reacted to them. The sealed portion, as I said, I used up 2 red ballpoint pens, underlining, starring, and sometimes I'd read just a verse 2 or 3 times. It was slow reading when you read a book that way, but oh my gosh, I loved that book. And the next book that came to my attention was when Christopher I hadn't read the 666 book yet. I had it, but I hadn't read it yet. And he asked me if I would be one of the people who would read Sacred Not Secret while it was being done. Well, he was writing it. And so oh my gosh, yes. So I did, which was an amazing experience. And I thought, how can I possibly even make a suggestion on anything here? He did just fine with the sealed portion. Of course, he had the things to do that. But it was a wonderful experience for me to be able to do that. And I have to tell you, when he first gave it to me, in what he had written so far, and he wanted me to get through the whole thing, I had about a week to do it. And when I started it, I read the first page and a half, and it took me 50 minutes. And I thought, Ida, you are not going to get through this book if you can't do better than this. And I thought, I don't know what's wrong. I couldn't get past the first page and a half. So finally I thought, well, read at least just one more paragraph. So I started the next paragraph halfway through the second page. And I thought, oh my God, that's the problem. This is the first line in the book, not the 1 page and a half earlier. And as soon as I could say, no, this goes up here, then it started flowing. And I thought, oh my gosh. And then I got through the book relatively quickly. And then I sat down with him and went all of this with him. And he'd already written the first paragraph. It was just in the wrong place. Anyways, it was wonderful to do that. But as I went through that book, I thought, I've been going to the temple for a very long time, because I was in my 70s, 75, and I'd been going to the temple since my early 20s. And I thought, and I couldn't figure that out myself. Why couldn't I see this? It's so plain. Why couldn't I? Oh, anyway, it was wonderful. And then the next book I read was John's book. John is a real person to me. And his explanations of all what he was talking about, I thought, well, no wonder they didn't make a lot of changes. Nobody had the Billy Hill he was talking about, and so they didn't make all kinds of changes. But it was a magnificent book. I've read it twice since. I've read the others again multiple times as well, the other two. And I thought, how can somebody read this and not know this is the only answer to what John was telling us 2,000 years ago? And of course, the next book was Human Reality. And I read that only twice. And there are people who have problems with it if they can't get out of religion. But I found it riveting. And when I got to chapter 15, I wanted to drop it from airplanes, because that's how you can take care of poverty and inequality. It's right there, folks, in 15. It's really simple. I really did want to drop that from airplanes. But even those I gave chapter 15, I don't think they even took a second look at it. I reminded a senator just recently, just read it. You've got the chapter 15, just read it. Anyway. One day when Christopher told me that he was going to do Joseph's biography, and at that first moment when he first got that information, he was worn out writing. And this was not something that initially, the very first minute, was exciting to him. That grew by leaps and bounds as he got into it. And Joseph's biography, I've read that several times too, and got it as it was coming out of him, one chapter at a time. And I cried myself a lot through that too, because I had always loved the prophet Joseph. When back in the 70s, when people would, were wondering all about these things that are coming out about the Mormon history and how does this fit and da-da-da-da. And I never moved away from Joseph, ever. I mean, I never doubted Joseph. Like even some people who've come into this work, the marvelous work and a wonder, had moved away from Joseph. I could never move away from Joseph. I couldn't. And now I was knowing what really happened and why. And revolutions on every page there too. Really think what Joseph had to do and why he had to do what he did. And what an incredibly difficult row that man had to hoe. It broke my heart. Particularly when I read when he was about 38. Those closest to him, I had to leave him too. And he really had to go it alone from then until he was killed. And to think that there are people in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that don't know about his book, and if they do, they won't read it, breaks my heart. Anyway, that was an incredible, incredible experience. And haven't convinced anybody in my family to read that book either. And I think, oh my gosh, you want to know what this man did and why he did it? And I thought about his brother Hiram, my great-great-grandfather, and how little he knew of what was going on then. Incredible characters there. So when it came time to think, okay, Ida's lost her mind. She's been bamboozled by a charismatic charlatan, and I thought, anybody that knows anything about me, no, that would never happen. I mean, I have met and known wonderful men. I have never been bamboozled by any of them. And for anybody to think that I have somehow lost my mind because I couldn't think things through is not okay. How can I explain to people in 2 seconds how I got to where I am? It's not possible for me to have been conned by a charlatan about the sealed portion and about these other books. And how can anybody think for 2 seconds that there's something wrong with Ida because she's not thinking straight? So anyway, I don't know what else you want to ask me now. I think
well, what led up to the excommunication?
Say again?
What led up to the excommunication? Is it because you were reading the books, you were giving them, talking about it?
Well, I don't see. I don't know what all happened there. That's something I'll have to ask Christopher.
Right. Well, you've attempted to give the books to.
Pardon?
You've attempted to give the books to people that you knew.
Oh well, yeah. Well, sure. Well, I'll tell you, when I had broken my leg, I had gotten several calls from Senator Bennett's office, and they wanted to get something to me. And I had, oh gosh, I had taken the sealed portion up to show Senator Bennett, and then he brought, long story short, he brought me a manuscript he'd written on testimonies thing of the Book of Mormon that he'd written, and he wanted me to critique it. So I took the time to do that, and I don't know who had contacted him, whether my brother or whatever, to do we've got to pull Ida back, that whatever. Whatever they're trying to do, I think that the church was concerned after my excommunication. They could tell from that encounter with my bishop and my stake president, Ida's not going to change her mind. And so, what do we do to shut her up? And you have to keep in mind that two of the 12 were presidents of BYU. I served under BYU under 2 of them. They knew me very well. They knew they know I'm a fairly strong character. They know I'm not going to back down, you know, that nobody's going to push me around. They knew that. And so how do you, what's the expression when you want to neutralize the situation? I don't know what they had in mind or what they thought they could do. I don't know. But I knew that they didn't want people coming and talking to me. So all of the things behind the scenes with trying to do this, I'm not privy to. I don't have the rocks. You know what I'm saying? Wouldn't be able to do anything with them if I did. So neutralize this. They got rid of the Women's Institute, you know. And when it happened, I thought, does that have anything to do with me? Does that really have anything? Is that my fault? They're getting away with that? I can't prove anything there. But I know they don't want people coming and talking to me.
Have you reached out to any of them since?
Me?
Have you reached out to any of them since that all happened, or
To who?
to
Anybody?
any of the people that
Has anyone even tried contacting or anything?
Well, the people who signed the letter made it very clear they couldn't associate with me, and I thought, I am not going to impose upon them. There was one they tried to get to sign it, and she refused. I have a picture of them from one of our yearly Christmas gettings together. They contacted her, but this other one I had known back in California days, so I'd known her since the 50s. We've known each other a long time, mid-50s. And I don't talk to her about it because she hasn't asked me questions. I would love to talk to her, but she doesn't I just said, I'll never bring it up. If you want to talk to me anytime, but I will never bring it up. And I don't, and I won't. And that's not easy not to, because I would, I love these books. I love what's in them. The information is just information, folks. Jeez. But if they don't want to read, you can't make them read. And if they're comfortable with where they are, then you're going to have to let them face what they want to face. I can't do it for anybody else. As much as I would like to sometimes. It's not my job, But I know that a lot of people who follow the marvelous work in a wonder have been shunned by friends and whatnot. And I don't think the church wants any of its members to be talking to any of the people who are reading these books. I just don't think they do. So, where do you want me to go now from here?
Can you express your feelings that you have for the people that have shunned you? Because I know
no, they were my friends.
I know.
I feel sorry for them. I'm not angry with them. I feel, if you don't want to agree with me, I can handle that. I feel good enough about me that I don't have to. I have no responsibility to rearrange me in anybody else's head. If that's where if they rearrange me in their own heads, that's their privilege. We all have the right to do that. We have free agency. We can do whatever we want to do what makes us happy. And if that makes them happy, then that's fine. I have not spent time and energy at all, being angry with them. I just have not. I'm not angry with them. I'm not angry with Jeff and Dallin. My heart breaks for those two men. I will put this on the tape. When the 2nd of December meeting happened in 2012, last year, he was giving the world the temple information. Anybody could have gone. And so in November, for the annual Joseph F. Smith family reunion in Salt Lake, I took some flyers up for that event. And I knew that Dallin would be there because his wife was going to be one of the speakers. And I saw her when I first got there. And I gave the flyer to her. And she looked at it and she said, Ida, because I love you, I will give this to him. But she said, you need to know he will not read anything that doesn't come from the First Presidency. I felt just like I'd been wounded for him. It just broke my heart. I thought, oh my gosh, this bright, brilliant man. It made me just sick to my stomach. And then at the end of that meeting, I saw him alone in the hallway. So I just talked to him for just very, very briefly. Gave me a hug, and he was very cordial. And I said, Dallin, I gave something to your wife. I said, I just don't want you to be blindsided. But I knew that he would come and he wouldn't be there. But I thought, nobody can ever come back and say, Ida, why didn't you tell me? You knew me. Why didn't you talk to me? And I you know, what can I say? You had the opportunity. You knew where I was. You knew what I knew, and you didn't ask me. And those two men know me very well. They worked with me, and I don't know what else I could do for them. I can't. So, but angry with people who, no, I'm not angry with my siblings. I love my siblings. You know, my baby brother is an incredible human being. And he's done wonderful, wonderful things with kids and his generosity and everything else. And I thought for sure he would be willing. And when he called me and said, Jeff said, don't read it. I thought, does that mean you're not going to? Jeff wanted me not to read it. He said, don't read it, don't read it. And I thought, how can I not read it? How can a book hurt me? I mean, the worst book in the whole world that's full of profanity and everything else, it's just information. So it's hard. I just don't understand why it's so hard for people to be open and willing to learn and reading. What's so hard? What is really so hard? But you can't do that for another human being. I was rereading in this one, in Isaiah, the 29, again. It is so powerful when it talks about the marvelous work and a wonder that will take place in the latter days, if you're ready for it, if you're open for it. Joseph makes it crystal clear in the words in Isaiah 29. The church has this book now. Or do they ever read this version? Or are they stuck with the King James? Because if they're stuck with King James, it isn't in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating to know as much as I know and I can't transplant that in anybody else. Everybody has to get it themselves. And bless their hearts. I'm not going to be in their shoes when they face those people and have to wish they. Isn't there a mountain that could just kind of bury me up right here, so I don't have to do this? Anyway, make sense?
Yes, very much.
So.
Did you want to talk about the phone call with Elder Holland at all? The phone conversation.
Okay.
With that?
Okay.
Just to give a little clarification for your side.
Well, when my brother called me, and he had talked to Jeff, they were very good friends. They'd known each other forever. They were in the same mission. And my first reaction was, I had been betrayed. I'd been betrayed. Because at that point, I hadn't told anybody else but Hiram that it even existed. I hadn't told my sister about it. I hadn't told anybody. Not anybody. Only Hiram. But because Hiram had gone through some interesting things with the church years ago, and he knew about the things that needed to be changed in the church. Hiram knew. And I thought, he'll get it. If he would read it, But the first thing he did, I guess, was to call Jeff. And Jeff told him, this guy's crazy, he's a nutcase, and and tell her not. So he's, Ida, you've got to call Jeff. And that became a real problem for me. Because I thought, how am I going to do, what am I going to do? How am I going to call Jeff? Because if I call Jeff, and he says to me the things that he told Hiram, and at that point in time, I had been to court with Christopher on several different occasions. He was trying to what's the expression? Clear his name, in the courts. And so I'd been there. And I thought, there were several times, sitting in the courtroom, listening to all of this stuff, I thought, gee, I wish they'd put me on the stand. Put me on the stand, this is crazy. Yeah. Anyway, so I thought, what if down line, I was put on the stand about that and was asked questions, about what I would hear from Jeff. And I thought, I can't. If I was ever put on the stand, and Jeff was put on the stand, who's everybody going to believe? Ida Smith or Apostle of God? I mean, this is crazy. And so what I did to Jeff was very selfish on my part, because I thought, I can't do this unless I tape it. Because if I'm ever put on a stand and Jeff is put on a stand, and we're not saying the same thing, I'm in deep yogurt, because nobody's going to believe me. So I thought, if whatever he says to me, I've got to have it recorded, because I could tell from what Hiram had said that he had said some very negative things about Christopher. Well, by this time, when I know that we are repeatedly told that knowing something as a human being is a misnomer. You can believe, but a lot of things you can't know. You can't. You can't know because you're humans. But I want to tell you, as far as Christopher is concerned, I know as well as it is physically possible to know who he is. And I don't have any doubt about that. And I know he is the messenger. I know the messenger. There's the one that talks about in the sealed portion. I read that in the sealed portion. His name is Christopher. Then I got an appreciation how Joseph must have felt when he was producing the Book of Mormon, to see Joseph and a son of Joseph. Imagine Joseph seeing that on the Urim and Thummim. Whoa! I'm sure that same thing happened with Christopher. Christopher, there it is. So, but as far as a human being can absolutely know something to that point, I know who Christopher is. And so when people get on my case about this charlatan and all these other things, that you don't know the man, you don't have any idea who he is. Well, I know, as far as it is humanly possible, to know who he is. And I don't have a problem with that. And if anybody else has a problem with that, read the damn books. And get off my case. Oh, Ida. Anyway. So, when he asked me to do something, I try to say how, or jump. I want to say how high on the way up. Sometimes I get interesting requests, but I know who he is. So I had to call Jeff. All to say, I had to call Jeff. So I had to get what I ever needed to do that. My heart. So when I called him, my heart was beating so fast. I'm not sure I can do this. And he wasn't. He had to call me back. So he did. And so I taped what was said. And and it's there. You can hear the tape. And when I asked him, "Have you met him?" No. Well, no. Yes, da 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 da. And so what's on the tape is what's there. And several days later, I gave him the tape to listen to, which was pretty stunning. And it was a couple of years before he put it on on the internet. Did I know he was going to put it on the internet when I gave it to him? No, I did not. Would I have given it to him anyway? I knew who he was. What am I supposed to do? So it's there. And I'm sure that that's been a horrible thing for Jeff. And I'm sorry that he's been in a lot of trauma because of that. I'm sure. And I'm pretty sure that it had to be him who told my 7 friends who wrote me that letter. I thought there's no other way for him to know that, for them to know that. Because I didn't tell them, and I doubted that they were on the internet. And since none of them were talking to me, and they all felt strongly enough to sign that letter, they must, I don't know what they would have said, what they would have been told. You need to disassociate with her. Maybe they were told to. I don't know. I just don't know. But I just can tell you what did happen. I got the letter, and I have not had a conversation with any of them since. I've seen them on a very few occasions. A couple of times I've seen them at dinners at BYU, alumni dinners at BYU, because 2 of the women have been officers in the Alumni Association, whatnot. And I've seen him a couple of times at Cedar City when we've gone to Shakespeare. Hi, Ida. Hi. Smiles but how are you doing? Fine. And that's it. people that I spent hours and hours and hours talking about everything with, and there's been absolutely nothing since '07. It was '08 when they did that. So, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard that tape. And when I see Jeff, it makes me sad. He's stressed. And I know I was part of that. But I thought, Jeff, can't you be an Abinadi? Can't you be not Abinadi, the next one, Alma? You know, throw it away. Get out of it. Come out of it. You know, help people to find the real truth instead of trying to do everything in the world to keep people from finding the real truth. And that's, but I know that's supposed to be, and I know one of the big reasons why Mormons are born into the church, because they're being given an opportunity to prove that they could do what they said they would do when they're not. But I can't do it for anybody else. There's no way. Even my family or those dear to me, you know, I can't. So, what else do you want me to talk about?
That's very good.
Do you want to talk about like the dedication or anything?
Yeah, I was wondering about the dedication, because it's over a year that you went to the dedication up there with the marker.
The headstone.
The
marker?
headstone. There's
Oh.
yeah. Maybe.
Okay. Well, let me talk to you a little bit about the headstone that I had put up. We talked about this, and I had determined at that point in my life that I thought, I've taken pretty good care of this old body, and so I wanted to give it to the University of Utah so that young teeny boppers, or young medical students, could see what the insides of a person who's taken care of themselves looks like. So the way I had gotten that plot is really very interesting. This was back, I don't even know what decade it was, but I was still in California, so it's a long time ago. I've had it for a long time. And my Aunt Margaret was in charge of who went into it, into the family. It's the family plot. And it became an obsession with me. You know, now with 20/20 hindsight, I think, damn it, you've been working on me my whole life. I've just been put here and do this and do this. I'm just a damn puppet. Anyway, I had to get a plot in the thing. Ruth was married to someone in Denver, and she would probably die there, and all my other family members kind of taken care of. And since I was still single, I thought, you better do something about that now. So I went, and then I found out my Aunt Margaret was in charge, but she was in the hospital, and she was not doing very well. I was absolutely driven to go and find, and there was one plot. There was one plot left. And I would have to get permission from all of my siblings to have that plot. Written permission. So I did. They all gave it to me. So it was in my name, my plot, for a long time. And I told Christopher. Somebody told him. I don't know, probably me. And we talked about that, and he talked about his having that plot. I said, I think it would be a great idea, because here's the monolith, you know, when he was when he was Hiram, and then just feet away would be Christopher, when he was, but not when Hiram. So I thought that was a great idea. And Christopher put me in charge of seeing it happen, working on what it was going to be on it, what we would do, all this other kind of stuff, picking the stone. So I got heavily involved with all of that stuff. Long story short, it happened. And I wanted to have, boy, that's probably the only facsimile of the sealed plates in Salt Lake City that still has the bands on it. I hadn't thought about that till right now. Oh, you'll have to put something in there about that. That all of the bands have been taken off the pictures and the facsimiles, except for on the headstone. Oh, that's funny. Anyways, so it had to be done by a certain time because when we wanted it dedicated and everything. And with help of generous people, paying for it, we got the thing done. We had because I wanted the plates, three-dimensional on there. And he gave us the words of Joseph, of what Joseph said just before Hiram, they were both killed. There it is. The church knows that. They have that in their archives. People don't understand that there were other people in that room when Joseph was shot. They heard what he said to Hiram. They heard, and they told the rest of the apostles in days to come. All of this is in Joseph's biography. Brigham Young found out about that, and Brigham Young was responsible for my family being separated way back then. I couldn't tell people what had happened before because I didn't know till the book was written. I didn't know that it was Brigham Young that had done all of that. Brigham Young was never one of my favorites, but I didn't know the role he had played in separating my family. And I was to some of the first meetings when the families got back together in the last century, and it was amazing. Getting my Smith cousins in Nauvoo. It was amazing. And when I think of all of those years, those families were separated because of Brigham Young and what he did. Anyway, I was there when it was dedicated. And you think my family wasn't mad about that? Holy cow. Yeah, that I had, big time. Really big time. I think they've calmed down a little bit. My sisters have been pretty good. My baby sister was really upset about that. But what's on there is true. What's on there is true. And when they understand, when they really understand, I love them, but I can't get in their heads. They have to do that themselves. And oh my goodness, I remind myself over and over, everybody has free agency. Everybody has it, Ida. They have to work through the things. I'm there. If anybody wants to talk to me, I'll talk. But I'm not going to bring it up. So this weekend I'm looking at being with them from Thursday till next Sunday. And I don't even know if I'll tell them about this taping. Oh well. Did that answer your question?